this morning. I think, like many of you, this parable, the parable of the sower, as we call it, is one that I've probably heard 100 times. I remember hearing it in Sunday school. I remember hearing it preached in church when I was a teenager. I remember learning about it in seminary. I remember translating it in my Greek class. And the one thing that sticks to me from it all the time is just how inscrutable this parable is. It is hard to parse what exactly Jesus was trying to get at here. You know, who is the sower? What are the seeds? What does he mean by the rocky ground? If the sower throws the seeds on the rocky soil and it grows up and then it falls over, does that represent people who are just doomed to fail in life? Does it mean that there are people that God can't make grow? It's a very difficult parable to understand. In fact, it's so hard to parse that Jesus breaks it down line by line for his disciples. I'm going to read that really fast. He says to the disciples, because they come up to him and they're like, "Hey, Jesus, say what?" And he said, "Listen, this is what the parable of the sower means. When anyone hears the message about the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what was sown in their heart. The seed falling on rocky ground refers to someone who has heard the word once and receives it with joy, but since they have no root, they last only a short time. When trouble or persecution comes because of the word, they fall away quickly. The seed falling among the thorns refers to someone who hears the word, but the worries of life and the deceitfulness of wealth choke the word, making it unfruitful. But the seed falling on good soil refers to someone who hears the word and understands it. This is the one who produces a crop yielding 100-fold, 60-fold, or 30 times fold what was sown." So that just kind of clears it up, right? I mean, now immediately I completely understand this sermon. The word parable itself has its root in the same Greek word where we get the word parabolic. Shoot yourself back to 9th grade geometry. Okay, a parable is something that is shaped in a curve. It's something that takes the long way round rather than coming right at the meaning. It lets you come in from the edges. A parable is designed to be inscrutable. Much like the parables of Jesus, I think that good poetry or good music is poetry that doesn't have a one-to-one interpretation. It's something that if someone hears it and then they go and talk to a friend about it, they can draw completely different interpretations from what they've heard. I think about modern Christian music, which generally gives me a little bit of a stomach ache. The music that I grew up singing in youth group, things like that. My big beef with Christian music that you hear on Christian radio is that a lot of the times it just kind of hits the nail on the head. You know, Jesus loves me. Jesus is my friend. Our God is an awesome God. He reigns from heaven above. It comes right at it. When you hear it, there's only one possible interpretation. Compare that to the music that has stuck in our church, that has been around for centuries. "Come, thou fount of every blessing, tune my heart to sing thy praise. Streams of mercy never ceasing, call for songs of loudest praise. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I see." What sound does grace make? What is a stream of mercy never ceasing? You hear these beautiful lines of poetry, and because of their parabolic nature, because of their inscrutability, it invites you to argue with it. It invites you to tear it apart. It invites you to argue with one another about the possible interpretations. And I think that's what makes those hymns stick, is that it means something different to each generation. It means something different to each listener. There are as many interpretations of those songs as there are worshipers who sing them. One of my favorite musicians and songwriters is a man named Sam Beam, who goes by the moniker Iron and Wine. And Sam's music is beautifully poetic, and you could hear one of his songs 100 times. I was listening to it on the way in, just so his music was fresh in my mind. And you can walk away with a different understanding of that song based on every time you hear it. I was first introduced to his music when I was 19, and it spoke to my heart in this like aching, melancholic way. And now that I listen to it as an adult who has kids, I hear it differently. The song means different things to me in different stages of my life. One of my favorite songs of his is called Upward Over the Mountain. And it goes, "Mother, don't worry, I killed the last snake that lived in the creek bed. Mother, don't worry, I have some money I saved for the weekend. Mother, remember being so stern with that girl who was with me. Mother, remember the blink of an eye as I breathed through your body." It means something different to me every time that I hear it, and its very parabolic nature is what makes it so special to me. I think that if poetry means the same thing to everybody that hears it, it's probably not good poetry. And in the same way, a parable of Jesus takes advantage of that inscrutability so that we can learn not just about what Jesus says, but also about ourselves, about the lenses that we see the world through. I read a interview with Sam Beam recently about his songwriting process. I myself am a songwriter, and I try to learn from songwriters who I respect. And he was asked by a journalist at the magazine Pitchfork about his songwriting process. And he says that he likes to wake up really, really early in the morning, like 4:30 or 5 in the morning. And that's when he writes every day. And the reason that he wakes up that early, he says, is because he's stuck in that moment between two different modes, the mode of dream and the mode of awake. Like, he says that he feels freer to write poetry when he's still in that in-between place, in between his dreams and in between his waking day. And I think that he really got at something there. How often do we have a weird dream, and then we wake up and we go to the breakfast table and we say to a partner or to a friend or to a parent, "I had the weirdest dream last night. You know, I dreamed that there was a lizard, but the lizard was my second grade teacher, and I stood up to give my book report, but I wasn't wearing any clothes, and then my teeth fell out." What do you think that means? You know, how often do we say that about our dreams? What do you think that dream means? It's the dream-like quality, the parabolic nature, the inscrutability of our dreams, the strangeness of them, is exactly what makes us think that they are imbued with meaning. And that's what Jesus takes advantage of in his parables, no exception being the parable of the sower. I think that, we come to these parables, these strange sayings of Jesus for the last 2,000 years, and we try to make meaning from them, and different people will come from different perspectives and draw different conclusions. But for me, especially since my time as pastor at Worcester Fellowship, which is a church for the homeless in Worcester, just down the road, is I've seen people who are human beings that have been completely disregarded by society and told that they have no place in the world because of mistakes that they've made, because of mental health problems, because of addictions, because of a history with the criminal justice system. And what I've learned is that, we as human beings are actually terrible judges of people's potential. The sower throws out seeds recklessly. Sometimes the sower throws seeds in the ground in ways that we would think make sense for a farmer, and sometimes they throw it into the rocks, and sometimes they throw it into loose soil. Sometimes they throw it without looking, I imagine. I can see someone just tossing them like this. We can trick ourselves into thinking that we understand what soil is going to bear fruit. And we can trick ourselves into thinking that we understand what seeds are going to produce, as Jesus said, 60-fold, 100-fold, 30-fold. But we are not the masters of the seed. Anybody who has ever had a garden will tell you sometimes the seeds that you plant that you think are going to do well completely fail. And sometimes the seeds that you plant and think are not going to do well flourish. Sometimes you think that you're planting a tomato seed and a zucchini grows up. Sometimes you'll be walking through your yard, as I did last week, through what used to be my chicken coop. My chickens are long dead. Sorry for that, but the foxes came and got them. And you'll see that a pumpkin is growing in the ground. That, the seeds of yesteryear that the chickens ate, they grew years later because of their progeny into vegetables that I never could have anticipated. What looks like rocky soil might be soil that's primed for growth. What looks like people who might not have anything to add to the conversation sometimes bring the perspective that was missing. I'm reminded of Mother Teresa, who at one point in her life was just a young woman who was going through and plucking people from the streets who were dying. And her only purpose in life was to give them a bed to sleep in and a warm place of respect and love for them to die. She wasn't a doctor. She wasn't a social worker. She didn't have access to unlimited resources like she did later in her life. All that she wanted to do was to fulfill her call that she felt Jesus gave her directly, which was to bring water to those who were thirsty, to bring food to those who were hungry, and to give people a place to die with dignity. And, like is the way of the world, a journalist who I'm sure thought that they were much smarter than Mother Teresa came up and said, Mother Teresa, I see the way that you're doing things. I think maybe you got it all wrong. This isn't actually the most effective way to bring people out of poverty. Maybe, Mother Teresa, you should really invest your time and resources into going to social worker school and, giving people, economic advantages and giving people, access to school and all these other kind of things. And he says, what do you think about that? Wouldn't that be more effective, Mother Teresa? Imagine. And she said, I'm not called to be effective. I'm called to be faithful. Sometimes we can trick ourselves into thinking that we have all the answers. We have eyes that can see people's potential. We have eyes that can draw out the most effective way of doing things. But oftentimes the world will surprise us and people will shock us with what they're able to do. I think that Jesus had a soft spot in his heart for people who the world told they didn't have any potential. A couple weeks ago, the lectionary reading in Matthew 14, just after all of these kind of agrarian parables about mustard seeds and a woman who puts yeast in the bread, and Jesus goes back to his hometown, and he goes to preach at his home synagogue, and he amazes people with his wisdom and with the signs and miracles that he's able to do. And then some snarky sucker in the back says, "Don't we know you? Like, aren't you the carpenter's son? Isn't Mary your mother? Aren't your brothers and sisters, aren't they here with us? Like, didn't we see you when you were just a snot-nosed kid running around the carpenter shop? Like, who are you to come here and tell us? Who are you? Has anything good ever come out of Nazareth? Has anybody ever been more wrong in their underestimation of a person? Who are you? He was the Messiah. He was the Word that breathed the world into being. Could you have possibly imagined being more wrong about someone than the way they sized up Jesus? Here's some good news. They were wrong, and sometimes we're wrong. Sometimes we think that someone's potential is low and their potential is actually high. Sometimes we think that people have nothing to say. Sometimes they have the key that we've been looking for. Sometimes the people who are the most unliked by society are the exact people that Jesus uses to spread the gospel. Sometimes society expects the Messiah to be one way and the Messiah is another. Sometimes the Messiah chooses the fishermen and the shepherds and the prostitutes to spread the kingdom of God. Sometimes Jesus uses the homeless. Sometimes Jesus uses the mentally ill. Sometimes Jesus uses the forgotten. Sometimes Jesus uses the abandoned LGBT youth. Sometimes Jesus uses the people who are addicted to heroin. Sometimes Jesus uses the people who are working the streets on Main Street in Worcester. People will surprise you. And if we allow ourselves not to decide that we somehow are the master architects of what the gospel is, if we have the humility to say that sometimes things work out differently than we think they should, if we sow the good news recklessly, if we sow our time and attention recklessly, if we love recklessly, if we don't think of ourselves as the architects, if we think of ourselves as the laborers who work with the master for the fulfilling of the gospel, we can go about things differently. People will surprise you. And this gospel that starts with small things like little seeds can grow in unexpected and unimaginable ways if we sometimes just get out of the way and we don't choose who's worthy of the good news and who's not. So my prayer for all of us is that we would love recklessly, sow the seed of the gospel recklessly, trust people recklessly, and allow ourselves to be surprised. Amen.